Khalil was 36 years old and made $60,000 a year as the crew chief for a commercial roofing company he happened to own. The salary was a deliberate choice, a number that covered the mortgage on their tidy three-bedroom house in Forest Acres, the payments on his 10-year-old Ford F-150, and the grocery bills. It was a humble figure that kept him grounded, his hands calloused, and his boots caked in the dust and tar of the work itself. The business, a $4.2 million enterprise his father had built from a single truck and two ladders, was a legacy, not a piggy bank. He was its steward, not its king. It was this distinction, this fundamental difference in how he saw the world, that his wife, Aja, had never quite understood. And it was this misunderstanding that led him here at 9:03 p.m. on a Sunday night, standing motionless in the narrow hallway outside their home office, a place he rarely entered. He had come looking for a book on architectural history his sister recommended, something to read before the grueling week started. The house was quiet, bathed in the soft, ambient glow of table lamps. Aja was in the office, a room she had claimed as her own, with its sleek $3,000 minimalist desk and a single, dramatic orchid that cost more than his weekly groceries. He assumed she was finalizing some reports for her job as a senior accountant at a downtown firm. He heard her voice, a low, confidential murmur, and paused, not wanting to interrupt. But then a single phrase, sharp and clear as shattered glass, sliced through the closed door. "Once he signs, we take it all." The words didn't register at first. They floated in the air, disconnected from his reality. He thought he must have misheard. A line from a movie she was watching on her laptop, perhaps. But then her voice came again, laced with a smug impatience he knew all too well. "Dorian, just be ready. Tuesday at 10. He has no idea. He thinks he's just protecting his precious legacy from taxes." Khalil felt the blood drain from his face. The hallway, with its warm beige walls and framed photos of their wedding, seemed to tilt. Dorian, her former colleague, the slick financial advisor with the $1,500 shoes and a smile that never reached his eyes. For the past 9 months, Aja and Dorian had been pressuring him. A coordinated campaign of casual suggestions, then urgent warnings about estate taxes and liability. They had drafted a complex trust, a tax structure, they called it. It was supposed to shield the business, his father's business, for their future. He had been hesitant, the paperwork dense and impenetrable, but Aja's insistence, her pleas to be smart about their future, had worn him down. He had finally, reluctantly, agreed to sign on Tuesday. He leaned his head against the cool drywall, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The book he was looking for was forgotten. His entire world had just been reduced to that one brutal sentence. "Once he signs, we take it all." It wasn't about protection. It was about plunder. The 9 months of conversations, the patient explanations, the feigned concern, it was all a lie. A long, elaborate, and devastating con orchestrated by the woman who slept in his bed. He closed his eyes. The image of her face that morning, smiling as she handed him his $20 thermal mug filled with coffee, flashing in his mind. He had no idea how profoundly he had been underestimated. Have you ever had a moment where the entire foundation of your life turned out to be a lie? It's a feeling of falling without end. Let us know in the comments if you've ever faced a betrayal that changed everything. Khalil stayed there for what felt like an hour, listening to the muffled sounds of her wrapping up the call. He heard the click of her laptop closing, the scrape of her chair. He pushed himself off the wall and walked silently back to the living room, sinking into his worn, $600 leather armchair just as she emerged from the office, a serene smile on her face. Her deep brown skin was luminous under the lamplight. "Hey, honey, couldn't find your book?" He just shook his head, unable to form words. The chasm that had just opened between them was terrifyingly vast, and she was standing on the other side, completely oblivious that he could now see straight to the bottom. The facade of their life had been meticulously constructed mostly by Aja. Their home in Forest Acres, a neighborhood of established brick houses and manicured lawns, was a testament to her taste. The mortgage was a manageable $2,200 a month, well within their means, but everything inside it spoke of a different ambition. The kitchen boasted a $7,000 Sub-Zero refrigerator and a gleaming 6-burner Wolf range that was rarely used for more than reheating takeout. She called them investments in our property value. Their living room was dominated by a cloud-like sofa from Restoration Hardware that had cost $8,500, a piece so pale and pristine that Khalil felt guilty sitting on it in his work jeans. His contribution was the custom-built shelving for his books, a project that had cost him $300 in lumber and a few weekends of his time. Aja's closet was a curated gallery of designer labels. She owned a $2,400 Burberry trench coat for the 3 weeks of the year it was cool enough to wear in Colombia, and a collection of handbags from brands like Chloe and Saint Laurent, each one representing more than a month of his take-home pay. He never begrudged her these things. She was a successful CPA, earning over $150,000 a year, and he believed she deserved to enjoy the fruits of her labor. His own wardrobe consisted of faded Carhartt pants, a dozen identical gray T-shirts, and a single well-fitting suit for weddings and funerals that he'd bought for $400 at a department store sale 5 years ago. The contrast was a running joke between them. "The high-low couple," she'd say with a laugh, straightening the collar of his shirt. He hadn't realized it was a joke at his expense. The pressure about the trust had started subtly 9 months prior. It was over a dinner of grilled salmon and asparagus she'd prepared, a rare home-cooked meal. "You know, I was talking to Dorian today," she began, dabbing her lips with a cloth napkin. "He was telling me about a client of his, a family business, that got hit with a massive estate tax bill, nearly wiped them out." Khalil had nodded, chewing slowly. "Dad set things up pretty well with his lawyer. I think we're okay." Aja had sighed, a delicate, theatrical sound. "Honey, that was 10 years ago. The laws change. Your father was a brilliant roofer, but this is a different world. We need to be proactive. Dorian specializes in this stuff. He could just take a look. No harm in that." A few weeks later, Dorian was sitting at their $4,000 dining room table, his alligator skin briefcase open, spreading documents across the polished wood. He was a man who seemed assembled from a luxury catalog, a crisp $500 Eton shirt, a Rolex that was probably worth more than Khalil's truck, and a voice as smooth as aged whiskey. He spoke in a language of acronyms and financial jargon, words like Grantor Retained Annuity Trust and Spousal Lifetime Access Trust flying through the air. Khalil felt a familiar sense of unease, the same way he felt when a slick salesman tried to push an unnecessary, expensive upgrade on a client. "Essentially, Khalil," Dorian had said, leaning forward conspiratorially, "we're building a fortress around your legacy. This structure will place the business assets into a jointly managed trust. It minimizes tax exposure and protects it from any potential creditors. It's the smartest way to ensure this business stays in your family for generations." The emphasis on your family was so slick, so perfectly calibrated. It made Khalil feel like a fool for even questioning it. The pressure escalated. Aja would bring it up at odd times, weaving it into the fabric of their daily life. While they were walking the dog around the block, she'd say, "I just worry, you know. You're on those roofs every day. What if something happened? This trust would protect me. Protect us." Another time, as he was lacing up his $180 Red Wing boots at 5 a.m., she came into the mudroom, wrapping her arms around him from behind. Dorian called yesterday. He said interest rates might go up and it could affect the valuation. We should really get this done, baby. For our future. Each mention was a small, calculated push, designed to make him feel irresponsible, like he was failing to protect her, to protect the very thing his father had entrusted to him. He remembered one particularly galling conversation. They were at a dinner party hosted by one of Aja's partners at her firm. It was in a sprawling, multi-million-dollar home on Lake Murray. Aja, stunning, in a deep blue silk dress that cost at least $900, was holding court. She introduced Khalil to a circle of men in expensive suits. "This is my husband, Khalil," she said, her hand on his arm. "He runs a roofing company." The way she said it felt diminishing, as if he ran a lemonade stand. One of the men, a surgeon, asked, "Commercial or residential?" Khalil began to explain the complexities of flat roof systems on industrial buildings when Aja cut in with a light laugh. "Oh, don't get him started on the technical stuff. He's the hands-on guy. I'm the one trying to get him to think about the big picture, the financial strategy. We're working with a brilliant advisor, Dorian Vance, to structure his assets properly. It's a miracle I'm getting him to see the light." The men chuckled politely. Khalil felt his face burn with a quiet, deep humiliation. She had painted him as a simple laborer, incapable of understanding his own business, a child who needed her sophisticated guidance. In that moment, he felt like a prop in the story she was telling about her own brilliance. He hadn't fought back. He had simply smiled and endured it, for the sake of keeping the peace. He had no idea she was auditioning her narrative, testing the lie out in public. The most painful memory, the one that now twisted in his gut like a rusty nail, was from about 2 months ago. He had come home, exhausted and grimy, after a brutal day wrestling with a new membrane system on a warehouse roof in the sweltering August heat. He found Aja and Dorian in their living room, heads bent over a fresh set of documents on the coffee table. They hadn't heard him come in. "He's just so stubborn about it," Aja was saying, her voice tight with frustration. "He has this sentimental attachment to his father's old way of doing things. He doesn't understand that a $4 million asset can't be run like a corner store." Dorian chuckled, a low, condescending sound. "Don't worry, he'll come around. Men like him, they respect authority. We just have to present it as the only logical choice, frame it as his idea to protect the family. He's a provider. That's his language. We just need to speak it." Khalil had backed away silently, his heart pounding. He went out the back door and circled around to the front, then entered again, this time making sure to slam the door. When he walked into the living room, they both looked up, their faces arranged into welcoming smiles. "There he is, the man of the hour," Dorian boomed, standing up to shake his hand. "We were just refining the liability protections. This is going to be ironclad, my friend." Aja came over and kissed his cheek, wrinkling her nose slightly at the smell of sweat and tar. "You work too hard, baby. That's why I'm trying to handle all this boring stuff for you." That night, lying in bed, he had felt a profound sense of unease. He had chalked it up to his own insecurities, his discomfort with the sterile world of high finance. He told himself Aja was right. He was just a roofer. She was the financial expert. She loved him. She wouldn't steer him wrong. It was a failure of imagination on his part. He simply could not conceive of a betrayal so deep, so intimate. He couldn't fathom that the woman whose hair he gently moved off her pillow in the mornings could be methodically planning to strip him of his birthright. The cruelty wasn't just in the plan. It was in the performance. It was in every concerned look, every reassuring touch, every, "I'm just trying to protect us," that was in reality a carefully sharpened knife. She had used his love for her, his trust in her, and his reverence for his father's legacy as weapons against him. She saw his humility not as a strength, but as a weakness to be exploited. She and Dorian didn't just want his business. They wanted to dismantle his identity in the process, to prove that his salt-of-the-earth values were no match for their slick, modern cunning. They had made a critical mistake. They believed the man who earned $60,000 a year was the whole man. They had never met the man who could calculate the load-bearing capacity of a steel joist in his head, who could diagnose a leak by the subtle discoloration of a ceiling tile, who had memorized every line of every contract his father ever signed. They had mistaken his quiet nature for ignorance. They thought the lion was a lamb, and now, standing in the silence of his living room on that fateful Sunday night, the lion was awake. He was no longer just a husband. He was the steward of his father's legacy, and he would defend it with a cold, methodical calm that Aja and Dorian could never have anticipated. They had no idea what was coming. The sensory details of the discovery were seared into his memory. The faint scent of lavender from the plug-in diffuser near the office door. The specific hum of the air conditioner kicking on. The weight of his own body as he sagged against the wall, his shoulder pressing into the sharp corner of the door frame. He could hear the faint clinking of ice in Aja's glass from inside the room. She liked bourbon. A single large cube in a heavy $50 crystal tumbler. "No, he's completely in the dark," she was saying, her voice dropping again to that conspiratorial pitch. "He thinks the signing on Tuesday is a formality. He's bringing his original incorporation documents, just like you asked." A pause. "What about the accounts? Are they ready for the transfer?" Khalil strained to hear Dorian's tinny voice on the other end, but he couldn't make out the words, only Aja's confident replies. "Good. Perfect. As soon as the trust is executed, you initiate the asset transfer. By the time he figures out what's happened, you and I will be the sole trustees with full control. The business, the property in Cottontown, the equipment, everything. Everything." The word echoed in the silent hallway. He thought of the yard in Cottontown, a gritty, unglamorous acre of gravel and steel-sided buildings. It was where he'd spent his summers as a teenager, sweeping floors and learning to drive the forklift. He thought of the crew, men like Marcus and David, who had worked for his father for 15 years before working for him. Men with families, mortgages, and a deep, abiding loyalty that Aja considered a business liability. She had once suggested they replace the older guys with a younger, non-union crew to cut overhead. He had shut her down immediately. "Those men are family," he'd said. She had rolled her eyes. "This is a business, Khalil, not a charity." He heard her laugh, a sound that had always warmed him, but now sent a chill through his soul. "Oh, he'll be devastated, I'm sure. A little tantrum, maybe. But what can he do? It will be perfectly legal. You're the expert, Dorian. You've made sure of that. He'll be left with his salary, and I'll give him the house. It's more than fair." More than fair. To be left with a fraction of his own life, a consolation prize offered by his own wife. The sheer arrogance of it was breathtaking. She had already decided his fate, calculated his worth, and planned his quiet dismissal from his own story. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, it was almost clarifying. There was no room for doubt, no possibility of a misunderstanding. This was a coup, planned with the cold precision of a corporate takeover. He stayed by the door until she ended the call. He heard her sigh, a sound of satisfaction. The soft thud of her feet on the hardwood floor told him she was coming. He moved with a speed and silence that would have surprised her, melting back into the shadows of the living room and settling into his armchair just seconds before she appeared in the doorway. "Ready for bed?" she asked, her smile as bright and empty as a stage light. He looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the elegant lines of her face, the carefully applied makeup, the chic $400 silk pajamas she wore. He saw a stranger, a beautiful, polished, an utterly ruthless stranger who had been living in his house, sharing his life, all while plotting its demolition. "In a minute," he said, his voice miraculously steady, "just thinking about the week ahead." She came over, perched on the arm of his chair, and ran her fingers through his short, neat locks. It was an intimate gesture he had once cherished. Now it felt like a violation. "Don't worry about the signing on Tuesday," she whispered, her voice like velvet. "It's the best thing for us. You'll see. Soon all this stress will be over, and we can finally relax." He had to fight every instinct in his body that screamed to recoil from her touch, to stand up and confront her with the ugly truth he now possessed. But a cold, clear thought cut through the rage and the pain. "She thinks I'm a fool. Let her." Her plan depended on his ignorance. His survival, and the survival of his father's company, now depended on her believing she still had it. Strategic restraint. It was a roofer's principle. You don't start tearing off shingles in a storm. You wait, you plan, and you act when the conditions are right. The storm had just hit, but he would be the one to decide when the work began. Monday morning was an exercise in surreal self-control. At 6:15 a.m., Khalil stood at the stove, making pancakes. It was their little Monday ritual. He measured the flour, cracked the eggs, and whisked the batter, his movements automatic. Aja came into the kitchen, dressed for work in a sharp, cream-colored sheath dress that probably cost $700. She kissed his cheek. "Smells good, baby." He could feel the bile rise in his throat, but he forced a smile. "Just for you." They sat at the kitchen island, the silence punctuated by the scrape of forks on their $150 Crate and Barrel plates. Every normal detail of their morning was now drenched in irony. The coffee from the $400 Breville espresso machine tasted like ash. The sunlight streaming through the window felt accusatory. "So, 10 o'clock tomorrow at Dorian's office, right?" she asked, her tone breezy. "I'll meet you there. I have a client meeting at 9, but it should be wrapped up by then." 10 o'clock, he confirmed, his voice even. "I'll bring the original incorporation papers and the deed for the yard." "Perfect," she said, her smile radiant. She had no idea she was confirming the details of her own demise. As he drove to work, the city of Columbia seemed different, sharper, as if a filter had been removed from his eyes. The glass towers downtown, where Aja and Dorian operated, looked cold and predatory. When he pulled into the yard in Cottontown, the familiar sight of his crew's trucks and the sprawling, low-slung buildings felt like a sanctuary. This was real. The smell of asphalt, the clang of metal, the easy camaraderie of the men who worked for him. This was what they were trying to steal. He saw Marcus, his foreman, a sturdy, reliable man with silvering temples, checking the inventory of insulation rolls. "Morning, Khalil." "That shipment of EPDM roofing membrane came in. It's the good stuff, the 90 mil Firestone. Cost a bit more, but it'll last 30 years. "Good," Khalil said, clapping him on the shoulder. "That's why we use it. Quality costs. But it pays you back in the long run." He was talking about roofing materials, but he was thinking about his life. He spent the morning on a rooftop, working alongside his crew. The physical labor a welcome distraction. The sun beat down, and sweat soaked through his shirt. Up here, things were simple. You found the leak, you patched it. You laid the membrane, you sealed the seams. There was a problem, and you solved it with skill and hard work. There was no hidden agenda, no fine print. But he knew he couldn't just work. He had to act. During his lunch break, while sitting in the cab of his truck, he did something he never thought he'd do. He took out his phone, a simple $300 Samsung model, and searched for a call recording app. He downloaded one, tested it, and made sure it worked silently. He felt a pang of guilt, a sense of violating a privacy he once held sacred. But the woman on the phone last night was not the wife he thought he knew. She was an adversary, and against an adversary, you gather evidence. He called Aja at 12:30 p.m., the recording app active. "Hey, just checking in. You have a good morning?" "Swamped," she said, a hint of annoyance in her voice. "This client is a nightmare. Listen, I'm glad you called. Dorian wanted me to remind you to bring your photo ID tomorrow. The notary will need it." "Right, of course," he said calmly. "Hey, I was thinking, this trust stuff is pretty complicated. Are you sure we're not giving up too much control?" He was baiting the hook, using the same hesitant language he'd used for months. He could almost hear her roll her eyes. "Khalil, we've been over this 100 times. This isn't about control, it's about protection. Dorian is one of the best financial planners in the state. Do you trust me or not?" The callback was perfect. She was using his trust as a weapon. "Of course I trust you," he lied. "Just getting nervous, I guess. It's a big step." "It's the right step," she said, her voice softening, turning persuasive again. "After tomorrow, we'll be completely secure. I promise." The call ended. He saved the recording, labeling it Monday Call. It wasn't a smoking gun like the night before, but it was corroboration. It was her, on record, pushing for the signing, reassuring him with a lie. It was one more piece of the fortress he was now building around himself. He had the what, the who, and the how. Now he needed the counterattack. And for that, he needed a lawyer. Not a slick financial advisor, but a real lawyer. A bulldog. And he knew exactly who to call. Evelyn Reed's office was not in a downtown glass tower. It was in a restored historic building on Gervais Street, with original hardwood floors that creaked and a pleasant scent of old books and lemon polish. Mr. Reed, her father, had been his father's attorney, a man who believed a handshake was a contract, and a man's word was his bond. Evelyn had inherited his firm and his integrity, but she had a sharp, modern mind that her father lacked. She was known for being a formidable opponent in a courtroom. Khalil sat across from her at a large mahogany desk cluttered with legal pads and file folders. He had called her office from his truck, his voice strained, and her secretary had fit him in at 4 o'clock that afternoon. He looked at Evelyn, a handsome black woman in her late 40s, with her hair in elegant silver-streaked twists. She wore a simple but powerful navy blue dress, and her gaze was direct and intelligent. Her hourly rate was a steep $850, a sum that made Khalil's stomach clench. But he knew this was not a time to be frugal. He told her everything. He started with the 9 months of pressure, the meetings with Dorian, and Aja's dismissive comments. Then he told her about the phone call he'd overheard. He didn't embellish or editorialize. He just laid out the facts, his voice low and steady. When he was done, he played the recording from his lunch call. Evelyn listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. She steepled her fingers, her eyes fixed on him. When the recording finished, the office was silent for a long moment. "Well," she finally said, her voice calm but with an undercurrent of steel. "They are both spectacularly stupid and profoundly arrogant. That's a potent combination. It makes them predictable." She leaned forward. "First, let's be clear. The business is your separate property. Your father's will was ironclad, and Mr. Reed made sure of that. As long as you haven't commingled the assets in any significant way, her claim to it is non-existent. The trust they've created is a vehicle to trick you into voluntarily converting separate property into marital property, which they then intend to seize control of. It's audacious, and it's fraud." A wave of relief washed over Khalil, so potent it almost made him dizzy. "So I can just refuse to sign?" "You could," Evelyn said, a slight smile touching her lips. "But a simple refusal doesn't expose them. It doesn't create a consequence. They'll just regroup and try another angle. You've been given a rare opportunity, Khalil. You know their entire playbook before the game has even started. I suggest we don't just defend, I suggest we win. Decisively. She outlined a plan that was as brilliant as it was ruthless. It was a counter move, a legal trap door that would use their own momentum against them. We will draft a new trust, she explained, pulling a fresh legal pad towards her. A simple, revocable, living trust. The sole asset of this trust will be 100% of the ownership of Khalil's Roofing LLC. The trustee and sole beneficiary of this trust will not be Aja. It will be someone you trust implicitly. Your sister, perhaps? Khalil nodded, thinking of Layla. She was a high school principal, organized, fiercely loyal, and the one person on earth he knew he could count on without reservation. Layla, he said. Perfect, Evelyn continued, scribbling notes. My paralegal will draft it immediately. It will be ready for you to sign tomorrow morning. Now, here's the beautiful part. The signature page will be formatted to look nearly identical to the one Dorian prepared. The notary they've hired will simply be notarizing a signature on a document. They are not required to read the entire contents. You will go to the meeting tomorrow. You will have both sets of documents in your briefcase. At the moment of signing, you will swap them. You will sign our document, not theirs. Khalil stared at her, the audacity of the plan dawning on him. It's that simple? It gets better, she said, her eyes gleaming. The moment your signature is notarized, the trust is executed. The assets are legally transferred. We will have a courier waiting outside Dorian's building. He will take the notarized document directly to the courthouse to be filed. Simultaneously, I will be on the phone with the bank that holds your business accounts, armed with a copy of the executed trust and a power of attorney. We will inform them of the change in ownership and freeze Aja from any access she might have. The entire strike will take less than 30 minutes. By the time they realize what document you've signed, the castle will be locked, and the drawbridge will be up. The cost for drafting the documents and executing the plan would be around $5,000. It was a small price to pay to save a $4.2 million business. He agreed without hesitation. He called his sister from Evelyn's office, explaining the situation in clipped, urgent tones. Layla's response was immediate. Whatever you need, Khalil. I'm on my way. She would meet him at Evelyn's office in the morning to sign the acceptance of her role as trustee. Walking out of the law office into the late afternoon sun, Khalil felt a profound shift inside him. The grief and shock were still there, a heavy weight in his chest, but now they were joined by something else, a cold, hard sense of purpose. Aja and Dorian had started a war, believing he was unarmed. They were about to learn that the quietest man in the room is often the most dangerous. The morning of the signing was unnaturally bright. Sunlight streamed into the bedroom as Khalil dressed, not in his usual work clothes, but in the $400 suit he kept for special occasions. It felt like armor. In his briefcase, 2 documents sat side by side, nestled in identical blue folders. One represented his ruin, the other his salvation. Aja was a vision of corporate elegance. She wore a steel gray Armani suit that he knew cost at least $2,800, paired with towering Jimmy Choo heels. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek chignon, and her makeup was flawless. She looked like a predator at the peak of her power. You look so handsome, she said, adjusting his tie. Her fingers were cool against his skin. See? This isn't so scary. Just want to get it over with, he said, his voice a low murmur. He met his sister at a coffee shop near Evelyn's office at 8:30 a.m. Layla's eyes were filled with a fierce, protective anger. She hugged him tightly. I'm so sorry, Khalil, so sorry. She signed the trustee acceptance forms, without a moment's hesitation. "Let's go burn them to the ground," she said, her voice grim. At 9:55 a.m., Khalil walked into the lobby of Dorian's building on Main Street. It was a cathedral of glass and steel, designed to make people feel small and insignificant. He rode the silent, high-speed elevator to the 24th floor. The doors opened onto a reception area that was all white marble, brushed steel, and abstract art. Aja was already there, chatting with Dorian by a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a panoramic view of the city. They both turned as he approached, their faces wreathed in triumphant smiles. Dorian, in a perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit that must have been worth $5,000, clapped him on the shoulder. "Khalil, glad you could make it. Ready to secure that future?" "Ready," Khalil said, his face a neutral mask. They were led into a conference room. The room was dominated by a massive glass table and 12 leather chairs. A woman in her 60s, the notary, sat at one end, her official stamp and journal laid out before her. The documents, Aja and Dorian's version, were already centered on the table, a thick stack of paper representing years of planning and deceit. Dorian launched into a final condescending summary. "So, just to recap, this spousal lifetime access trust, or SLAT, will hold the assets of the roofing business. You and Aja will be co-trustees, meaning all decisions are made jointly. This shields you from liability and minimizes tax burdens down the road. It's the standard instrument for an estate of this size." He slid the document towards Khalil. "You'll sign on the last page, here and here." Khalil opened his briefcase and took out his copy, placing it on the table. He appeared to be comparing them. Aja watched him, a small, indulgent smile on her face. She thought he was having a final futile moment of due diligence. "Looks complicated," Khalil said, his voice quiet. "That's what you have us for, honey," Aja said soothingly, "to handle the complicated things." This was it, the moment of truth. He took a deep breath. With a smooth, practiced motion, he slid their document to the side and placed his own, the one from Evelyn, in its place. He opened it directly to the signature page. The formatting was, as Evelyn had promised, nearly identical. The movement was so natural, so unassuming, that neither Aya nor Dorian registered it. Their focus was on his face, on the prize they were about to claim. He picked up the pen, a heavy, expensive fountain pen Dorian had provided. He looked at Aja, a long, steady look. For a fraction of a second, he saw a flicker of unease in her eyes, a tiny crack in her composure. But it was gone as quickly as it came. He signed his name, his hand perfectly steady. Khalil D. Johnson. "Initial here, please," the notary said, pointing to a small box. He did. She took the document, opened her journal, and made her entry. She pressed her official stamp onto the paper, the metallic thud echoing in the silent, glass-walled room. "Congratulations," she said, smiling blandly. "You're all set." It was done. Khalil stood up. He closed his briefcase. Aja was beaming, her eyes shining with a greedy, triumphant light. Dorian was already reaching for his phone, likely to begin the process of transferring the accounts. "Well," Aja said, coming around the table to kiss him, "that's that. I'm so proud of you for finally doing the smart thing." Khalil took a small step back, avoiding her kiss. He looked from her face to Dorian's. "I don't think you understand what just happened," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "The document I just signed wasn't your trust. It was mine." The smiles on their faces froze, then slowly evaporated, replaced by identical masks of confusion. "What are you talking about, Khalil?" Aja asked, her laugh a little too sharp. "Don't be silly." "The document I signed," Khalil repeated, speaking slowly and clearly, as if to a child, "is the Khalil D. Johnson Revocable Trust. It places 100% of my company's assets under the sole control of a new trustee, my sister, Layla Johnson. As of 30 seconds ago, she has complete legal authority over the business, its properties, and all of its financial accounts. You, he said, his eyes locking with Aja's, have nothing. The color drained from Aja's face. She looked like she had been slapped. Dorian snatched the document from the notary's desk, his hands trembling as he flipped through the pages. His face went from confusion to disbelief, to pure, unadulterated horror. This is, he stammered, unable to form a sentence. Legal, Khalil finished for him. Perfectly legal. My attorney, Evelyn Reed, drafted it yesterday. I believe her courier is already on his way to the courthouse, and I imagine she is currently speaking with my bank. Dorian's phone buzzed violently on the table. He stared at it as if it were a snake. The caller ID likely read American Trust Bank Business Division. Aja stared at Khalil, her mouth opening and closing silently. The mask of the sophisticated, intelligent CPA had shattered, revealing something ugly and desperate beneath. You can't, she whispered, her voice cracking. How could you know? Khalil allowed himself a single, cold flicker of feeling. You said it yourself, Aja. Sunday night. On the phone with Dorian. He paused, letting the words sink in. You whispered, once he signs, we take it all. You just forgot I was in the next room. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the sound of a world collapsing. Aja's carefully constructed life, her ambition, her arrogance, it all crumbled to dust in that single, devastating moment of revelation. He had not raised his voice. He had not yelled or accused. He had simply stated the truth, and the truth was more powerful than any weapon they could have imagined. He turned and walked out of the conference room, leaving the ruins of their lives behind him. The aftermath was a cascade of consequences, each one a direct result of their own greed. The first was Dorian. As Khalil rode the elevator down, Evelyn was already on the phone with the managing partner of Dorian's firm. By the time Khalil reached the lobby, Dorian was likely in a meeting he would not be walking out of with his job intact. Evelyn later informed him that she had also filed a formal complaint with the Certified Financial Planner Board of Standards, submitting the recording of the Monday phone call as evidence of unethical and fraudulent conduct. Dorian Vance, the man in the $5,000 suit, lost his job within the hour. His license was suspended pending a full investigation, a career death sentence. His reputation as a brilliant advisor was irrevocably destroyed. He would be lucky to find work managing the finances of a small-town car wash. For Aja, the collapse was more personal, more total. She was fired from her prestigious accounting firm by the end of the week. The firm could not afford the liability of employing someone who had been caught orchestrating a multi-million-dollar fraud against her own husband. The news traveled quickly through Columbia's tight-knit professional circles. The shame was absolute. Her frantic voicemails began that afternoon. The first one, left at 12:15 p.m., was angry and confused. Khalil, you call me back right now. You have no idea what you've done. This is a huge mistake. The second, at 2:30 p.m., was pleading. Baby, please, we can fix this? I don't know what you think you heard, but you misunderstood. Dorian pressured me. He had this idea, and I just went along. It was never about hurting you. I love you. The third, at 7 p.m., was desperate. They fired me, Khalil. They fired me. My career is over. Everything I've worked for is gone. Please, don't do this to us. To me. The final one, left just after midnight, was just the sound of her weeping, a raw, broken sound that held no trace of the confident, powerful woman he once knew. He listened to them all once, then deleted them. They were messages from a ghost. Evelyn filed for divorce the next day on the grounds of financial fraud. Because the business was now securely in a trust controlled by his sister, it wasn't even part of the marital estate to be argued over. The court proceedings were swift. Aja, without a job and facing professional ruin, had no resources to fight. She was awarded the house in Forest Acres, as she herself had deemed more than fair. But without her six-figure salary, she couldn't afford the mortgage and the taxes. The house, her monument to a life of curated perfection, went into foreclosure 6 months later. The last he heard, she had moved back in with her parents in a small town 2 hours away, her Burberry trench coat and Chloe handbags sold to pay her legal bills. Khalil felt no joy in her destruction. He only felt a profound, quiet sadness for the woman he thought he had married, a woman who had never really existed. The consequences she faced were not his revenge, they were the natural harvest of the seeds she had sown. He had not acted out of cruelty, but out of a fierce, protective love for his father's legacy and for the people who depended on it. Justice, he learned, wasn't about punishment, it was about balance. And the scales had finally been balanced. Have you ever had to make a hard choice to protect yourself or your family? It can be one of the loneliest journeys. Share your thoughts on how you found the strength to do what was right, even when it was painful. 6 months later, the autumn sun cast a golden light over the roofing yard in Cottontown. The air was crisp, and the scent of changing leaves mingled with the familiar smell of tar and diesel. Khalil stood on the loading dock, a mug of coffee in his hands, watching his crew load up for the day. The business was thriving. With Layla managing the trust and a top-tier accounting firm hired by Evelyn handling the books, Khalil was free to do what he did best: run his company. He had made some changes. He'd given every member of his crew a 10% raise and upgraded their health insurance plan. He invested $250,000 in new equipment, including a state-of-the-art crane and 2 new service trucks. But the most significant change was standing next to him. Marcus and David, the 2 veteran roofers who had been with the company for a combined 30 years, were no longer wearing tool belts. They were wearing crisp new polo shirts with the company logo, holding tablets instead of heat guns. "The specs on the university library job just came in," Marcus said, tapping his screen. "They want a full thermoplastic polyolefin system with tapered insulation. It's a big one, Khalil. Maybe a $500,000 contract." "Good," Khalil said, smiling. "Work up a preliminary estimate. David, I want you to do a site visit this afternoon. Take the new drone. Get some aerial shots of the existing roof structure." He had promoted them to estimators, a move that had shocked them both. He'd created the positions for them, investing in their deep, practical knowledge of the business. He was paying them each a salary of $75,000, more than he still paid himself. He was building his company from the inside out, rewarding loyalty and expertise over slick presentations and empty promises. His phone rang. It was Layla. "Morning, little brother. Just approved the capital expenditure for the new safety harnesses. They're the best on the market, the ones that cost $600 each, no cutting corners." "Never," he said. "Thanks, Layla, for everything." "That's what family is for," she replied warmly. "You know, Dad would be so proud of you, not just for saving the business, but for how you're running it. You're honoring him." After the call, Khalil looked out at his yard, at the men who were not just his employees, but his community. He thought about the glass conference room, the expensive suits, and the empty promises. He had been so close to losing it all, seduced by a vision of wealth that had nothing to do with true value. Aja had believed that wealth was something you could acquire, something you could take. But she was wrong. True wealth isn't a number in a bank account or a designer label in a closet. It isn't a house in a fancy neighborhood or a title on a business card. He knew that now. True wealth is built, not taken. It's the trust of the people you work with. It's the pride in a job well done, a roof that doesn't leak, a promise that is kept. It's the legacy of integrity passed down from a father to a son. It is the quiet satisfaction of knowing you have built something real, something that will last, something that serves others. His hands were still calloused, and his boots were still dusty, and he had never felt richer in his entire life. What does true wealth mean to you? Is it financial, or is it found in family, community, and peace of mind? We believe stories like Khalil's show us what truly matters. If you agree, subscribe to Love Beyond Pride for more stories of integrity, justice, and the quiet triumph of the human spirit.